His face turned white. Not the pale flush of discomfort, but the drained, soul-vanishing look of a man who just realized the world has hurt him at his worst. Monkeys in suits, all of Africa should be recolonized. The words echoed, sharp and clear, across 200 million screens. A voice unmistakably Donald Trump's. A silence swept through the Fox News studio like a cold wind. You could hear nothing but the slow, heavy breathing of a president unraveling, live on air. Across from him on the split screen, Ibrahim Traoré sat calm and still, his expression unreadable. Dressed in the proud, traditional cloth of BurkinaFaso, his voice was smooth as glass. "Mr. President," he said slowly, "would you like me to continue playing the next recording, or would you prefer to explain to the world why you said Africa should be purged of its leaders?" Trump's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The mask had fallen, the plan exposed, and millions were watching. Then came the words no one expected. No, turn it off. This isn't real. This is fake," Trump shouted, flailing at the camera, eyes wild, hands trembling. "It's a setup, deep fakes." But Ibrahim didn't flinch. "These recordings," he said gently, "have been verified by your own FBI, your own intelligence services. You're not being framed. You are being held accountable." And then came the final blow. Traoré reached into a leather folder and calmly held up a paper with Trump's signature, visible to the camera. "This," he said, "is an executive order, signed by you, authorizing $500 million for the neutralization of destabilizing African elements. My name," he added quietly, "is at the top of your kill list." Trump stumbled back in his chair. The world watched in horror as the most powerful man on earth melted into panic, gasping, muttering, sweating. How did you know everything?" Trump whispered, barely audible now. "I prepared," Ibrahim said softly. "While you played with hatred, I studied you." Fade to black. 3 months earlier, the sun rose red and heavy over Ouagadougou, casting long shadows across the presidential compound. Inside a dimly lit strategy room, President Ibrahim Traoré stood over a wooden table where documents and photographs were spread like puzzle pieces. He was surrounded by his closest aides, loyal soldiers, intelligence officers, and one nervous minister who had not slept the night before. "He made the call," Ibrahim said. "Trump wants a live interview. Fox News. With me." The room fell silent. "An ambush?" Major Sawadogo asked. "No," Ibrahim said. "He thinks he can humiliate me, like the others." There was no laughter in the room, only the faint buzz of tension that hangs before a storm. "You're walking into a lion's mouth, President," said Dr. Ouedraogo, the head of national security. "This could be a trap." "It is," Ibrahim nodded. "But lions forget the antelope also has eyes. And this one sees clearly." He turned to the files laid out before him, evidence gathered over months. Intercepted calls, U.S. intel leaks, photos of black ops teams moving through Nairobi, Accra, Kinshasa. For years, Ibrahim had watched from the shadows, resisting quietly while American power played its game of kings and pawns across Africa. But something had changed. This time, he said, "We don't just defend. We reveal." Across the ocean, in a much grander room lined with gold and marble, Donald Trump leaned back in his chair, eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. "We're going to end this, kid," he told Steve Bannon, who had been quietly reinstalled as a strategic advisor. "He kicked out our agents. Now others are following. We'll bring them on live TV. Cut him down. Make Africa remember who's boss." Bannon smirked. "You'll own him, like the rest of them." Trump slammed his hand on the table. "America doesn't get disrespected by some African nobody. I'm going to show the world how we deal with children who forget who feeds them." In the days that followed, Trump's team prepared like generals before a war. Dossiers on Burkina Faso's poverty, instability, and Traoré's past were piled high. Speechwriters worked late, crafting talking points designed to undermine, embarrass, destroy. They didn't know Ibrahim had already heard them. Back in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim and his team listened to the tapes. Dozens of them. conversations between Trump and foreign leaders, advisors, even generals. He called African leaders animals, Major Sawadogo whispered. He called me a monkey, Ibrahim said, staring at the transcript in front of him. His face remained still, but his hand tightened into a fist. They had enough to bring down an empire, but the choice to use it weighed heavy. This will start a storm, Dr. Ouedraogo warned again. It already has, Ibrahim replied. We just haven't called it by name. He looked to his team. Prepare everything. The night before the debate, Ibrahim stood alone under the stars. Somewhere in Washington, his opponent was rehearsing punchlines and insults. Here, on African soil, a young president was preparing to defend not only himself, but a continent that had been underestimated for centuries. He whispered a quiet prayer, not for victory, but for courage, for truth, for the ancestors watching. And as the wind picked up, carrying the dust of Burkina's red earth into the sky, he felt them standing with him. It had begun. If something in this story touched your heart, pause for a moment, like this video. It means more than you know. Subscribe and share if you believe the time for Africa's rise is not a dream. It's already happening. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Let's show how far this message can reach. The lights in the Fox News studio were bright, too bright. They bounced off Trump's powdered skin, highlighting every crack in his carefully rehearsed expression. He adjusted his tie, looked into the mirror, and practiced his smile. It was meant to be a show of power, of dominance. This will be historic television, whispered Sean Hannity from behind the stage. Just don't go soft on him. Show the world who's boss. Trump grinned, the way a lion does when it smells blood. He's just a kid, he said. An African kid. In a modest room thousands of miles away, President Ibrahim Traoré sat quietly. His clothes were plain but dignified, stitched by hand in the colors of BurkinaFaso. A leather briefcase sat by his side, locked. Its contents could end a presidency or spark a war. He wasn't nervous, not because he wasn't afraid, but because he had made peace with what this moment might cost. A member of his team whispered, "It's time, sir." Ibrahim nodded. "Let's begin." The screen split. On one side, Trump, surrounded by flags, marble, and American pride. On the other, Traoré, surrounded by the calm quiet of a nation that had survived colonization, coups, and now, perhaps, history's judgment. "Good evening, America," said Sean Hannity, his voice silky. "Tonight, we bring you a special conversation between President Donald J. Trump and President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. A chance to clear the air or light it on fire." A laugh from the audience. Then the first question, President Trump, how do you respond to rising criticism from African leaders who say the United States is acting like a colonial power? Trump leaned forward, grinning. "Sean, it's simple. America gives aid. We give protection. We give opportunity. And in return, we expect respect. Not insults. Not arrogance. Especially not from countries that wouldn't survive without us." His voice cut sharp, aimed like a spear. "Africa needs to remember," he continued, turning to the camera, "that it exists in the world order because we allow it. Without America, these nations would collapse." There was silence. And then Traoré spoke. "That's a very interesting view, Mr. President," he said calmly. "But perhaps we should let the American people hear what you really think. When the cameras are off, when you think no one is listening." Trump blinked. "What are you talking about?" Ibrahim gently opened the briefcase. Inside, tapes, transcripts, documents marked confidential. He slid a paper across the table in front of him and held it to the camera. "This," he said, "is a transcript of your phone call with the French president last December. In it, you refer to African presidents as, how did you say it? Monkeys in suits." Trump's face tightened. "That's a lie," he snapped. Ibrahim tilted his head slightly, almost amused. "Sean, would you or your producers prefer I play the recording?" Gasps echoed behind the camera. Hannity froze. Technicians glanced at each other. And then Ibrahim pressed play. Trump's voice filled the air, smug and unmistakable. "Emmanuel, these Africans are getting too arrogant. Especially that boy from Burkina Faso. They're all monkeys in suits, thinking they matter. We need to remind them who's boss. For a full 5 seconds, no one breathed. Trump lunged forward. That's fake. Deep fake. Manipulated. Ibrahim simply reached for the next file. This is a signed executive order. You approved $500 million to remove leaders in Africa deemed hostile to American interests. My name is at the top of that list. Trump tried to speak, but his mouth trembled. This isn't happening. Yes, Ibrahim said softly. It is. The panic set in like a storm breaking open. Trump's hand shook. His words turned to fragments. You don't understand. It's strategy. It's pressure. The next recording played. Vladimir, we have to act together, Trump said. Keep these Africans in line. Recolonize where we can. Assassinate the rest. Trump stood up, knocking over his chair. Turn it off. Turn it off. Hannity tried to cut the feed. Ibrahim, still calm, looked directly into the camera. The American president, he said, just confessed on global television to a plan of genocide. Chaos exploded in the studio. Producers shouted. Secret Service agents moved toward the stage. And Trump, once a master of the show, was reduced to a sputtering, sobbing wreck. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, he screamed. America is slipping. Africa is rising. We had to stop it. Ibrahim stepped in quietly. So, you planned assassinations? Coups? Civil war? Trump didn't deny it. Yes, he cried. To protect America. At that moment, the truth could no longer be hidden. Not with lies. Not with lawyers. Not with power. Trump's own words had destroyed him. Live. On air. Back in Ouagadougou, people stood frozen in front of their TVs. On balconies, in shops, in street corners, they stared in silence. Then slowly, as if rising from the ground itself, came a chant. Ibrahim. Ibrahim. If something in this story touched your heart, pause for a moment, like this video. Subscribe and share if you believe the time for Africa to rise is now. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Let's show how far this message can reach. Washington fell into a stunned silence that night. Not just the capital, but the country, the world. There were no debates on what was real and what was fake. There were recordings, signed orders, transcripts, a president caught, not in rumors or spin, but in his own voice, outlining a campaign of death and dominance. Inside the White House, chaos bloomed like wildfire. Vice President J.D. Vance called an emergency meeting with the cabinet. He's lost it, Vance said quietly. He confessed. On live TV, this isn't politics anymore. It's madness. The Secretary of Defense stood pale, sweating. Do we say it was fake? Ow! The Secretary of State snapped. We all heard it. His voice. His words. His orders. We are not covering for genocide. Down the street, the halls of Congress filled with shouting voices. Nancy Pelosi, older now but fierce as ever, stepped to the podium. We are beginning immediate impeachment proceedings, she said. Not because we disagree on policy, but because the President of the United States just admitted to planning crimes against humanity. Even Republicans couldn't defend him. Senator Mitt Romney stood in front of reporters, shaken. There are no words, no excuses. We cannot be a party that covers for this. In Africa, Ibrahim Traoré became something else entirely. Not just a president, a symbol. The young man who stood his ground, who exposed the dark heart of a superpower, who proved that Africa was no longer a silent stage for foreign puppeteers. In cities from Dakar to Nairobi, celebrations erupted. Fireworks lit up the sky. Old women wept. Children painted his name on walls. He had done what many dreamed of. He had made the world listen. Back in the U.S., Trump was a shadow of himself. Barricaded in the Oval Office, surrounded only by the most loyal aides, he paced like a man trapped in a nightmare. He destroyed me, Trump muttered. That little African boy. How did he know? Steve Bannon tried to speak sense into him. We'll say it was a psychotic break. Drug-induced. Something. But even his lawyer had lost hope. Sir, I'm resigning. I can't represent someone who confesses to genocide on national television. Then the door opened. Federal marshals. An arrest warrant in hand. Trump looked up. eyes empty. "I was protecting America," he mumbled. "You were planning a genocide," one of the agents said coldly. "Let's go." 6 months later, the world watched again. Not a TV debate this time, but a courtroom in The Hague. The former president of the United States stood in the dock, facing the International Criminal Court. The charges: crimes against humanity, conspiracy to commit genocide, attempted political assassination of foreign leaders. Ibrahim sat across from him, no longer just the president of BurkinaFaso. Now he stood as the voice of continent. He gave his testimony clearly, without bitterness. Only truth. "Your Honors," he said, "this was not about policy disagreements. It was about a belief that Africans were subhuman, disposable, replaceable. I present evidence not only of planned assassinations, including my own, but of a global plot to recolonize Africa through death and fear." He presented recordings, memos, intelligence reports, testimonies from horrified U.S. generals who had refused to carry out the orders. The evidence was overwhelming. Even the presiding judge, known for a stern and neutral tone, spoke with visible emotion during sentencing. The defendant showed contempt for life, for dignity, for the very idea of equality among nations. This court found him guilty on all charges. Trump didn't speak. He stared ahead, broken. The sentence: life in prison without parole. Back home, Ibrahim was welcomed like a returning warrior. But there was no celebration in his eyes. He had survived, but he had also seen the truth of power and what it cost. From across Africa, leaders gathered in Ouagadougou. And for the first time, they didn't come at the invitation of a superpower, but to unite among themselves. They voted unanimously. Ibrahim Traoré would become president of the African Union. He stood before the flags of 54 nations and spoke plainly. "Trump gave us a gift, though he did not mean to. He showed us we must stand together or fall apart one by one." Under his leadership, the continent changed. Corruption was challenged. Borders opened for trade. Education and health budgets doubled. Technology hubs bloomed in cities that had once been forgotten. The world called it the Traoré effect. But for Ibrahim, it wasn't about fame. It was about future. 2 years after the trial, he stood at the United Nations General Assembly. "Some believed Africa's time would never come," he said, his voice firm, humble. "But we are not waiting for permission. We are not waiting to be rescued. We are the rescue." The UN erupted in applause. Delegates from every corner of the world stood for him. They passed the Traoré Protocol, a new international law requiring all member states to monitor and report early signs of genocidal planning. Never again, they vowed, would silence protect hatred. In his prison cell, Donald Trump aged quickly. No speeches, no cameras, no cheers, only a small radio. Sometimes, when the guards weren't watching, he would press his ear to it and listen. He'd hear the name, Ibrahim, Ibrahim, over and over again. How did he know? Trump still whispered to himself in the dark. The answer had never changed. He had underestimated him, and he had underestimated Africa. If something in this story touched your heart, pause for a moment, like this video. It means more than you know. Subscribe and share if you believe the time for Africa's rise is not a dream. It's already happening. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Let's show how far this message can reach.